oxide.
So just for the lay people, how does something like Viagra and the nitric oxide gas itself, how do they work together?
So in the lining of the blood vessels, there's an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase, and it's in our endothelial cells. And the endothelial cells are the cells that line all blood vessels throughout the body. So when we become, let's use intimacy and sexual activity, for example. So when we become stimulated, that turns on these nerve endings, the non-adrenergic, non-cholinergic nerve endings, but it also tells our blood vessels to make nitric oxide so we can dilate the blood vessels. And so nitric oxide, once it's produced, it activates a second messenger system called soluble guanylose cyclase. And this enzyme leads to an accumulation of a molecule called cyclic GMP. And so this is pretty complex biochemistry, but it's the molecule cyclic GMP that leads to smooth muscle relaxation, calcium mobilization, which leads to blood vessel dilation. So as we all know, in order to get an erection, both in men and women, we need to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs where we can get engorgement of blood flow, prevent the outflow, and that's both a clitoral and a penile erection. So the PD5 inhibitors, drugs like Viagra, prevent the breakdown of cyclic GMP. So I like to say nitric oxide turns this switch on through the elevation of cyclic GMP, and the PD5 inhibitors keep it on because they prevent the breakdown of that molecule. And so that's why you're warned against 4-hour erections. That's why there's, in some people, an unsafe drop in blood pressure because you've lost the off switch. And so physiology, normal physiology and biochemistry, we turn something on, but then there's regulation and we can turn it off. But the PD5 inhibitors prevent that signal from being turned off. And look, these drugs are very successful. They work great for improving sexual function, at least in 50% of the patients.
So what happened to the other 50%? What was the problem with the other 50%?
Well, the other 50% don't produce any nitric oxide to lead to an accumulation of cyclic GMP. Mm-hmm. So the drugs cannot and do not work. So that told us 25 years ago that the mechanism of action of erectile dysfunction is a loss of nitric oxide production. That's the fundamental basis of sexual dysfunction. If you lose the ability to make nitric oxide, you cannot get an erection because you can't dilate the blood vessels and get engorgement into the sex organs. But if you look at the clinical indications now and clinical data on the PD5 inhibitors, they're improving pulmonary hypertension. They can dilate the pulmonary arteries and reduce pulmonary pressures. There's data now showing that people who have been on PD5 inhibition therapy, low dose, for 3 to 5 years have less incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia. So what we're finding is any mechanism, any modality that improves blood flow, dilates blood vessels, improves oxygen nutrient delivery, basically prevents most age-related chronic diseases. And that's what nitric oxide does.